Good morning. We will go ahead and start the roundtable here this morning. I have asked a few of our resident experts here to join us for the interagency spring breakup roundtable. When we first discussed this back in Washington, D.C. about the opportunity to have such a gathering, it was described in different terms. It was flooding, it was spring conditions, but here in Alaska we just know it as breakup. And I noted in an article a couple of days ago that here in Anchorage we seem to have multiple breakups, and it's just a question of the thaw and the freeze and the thaw and the freeze. In my world, it's how much windshield wiper fluid I have to replace on a somewhat weekly basis. So that's my barometer. But I think it's fair to say that here in the state, it's no stranger when we anticipate spring flooding. It's part of our reality. I think the good news is that because of that, we probably have one of the best state emergency management agencies in the business. We've got a long history of predicting and responding to spring flood incidents in not only the local areas around here, but really the most remote communities in rural Alaska. History tells us that when we face our annual winter breakup and the flooding that comes with it, Alaska responds quickly and pretty efficiently. But even though we know our track record, we also know that this year has been record-setting when it comes to our snowfall. So with breakup on the horizon, many Alaskans are growing concerned that record-breaking snow could lead to record-breaking floods. So we come together this morning out of the concern that this year might somehow be different. Here in Anchorage, we've seen near-record snowfall. The 60-year record for Anchorage was 132.6 inches set in the winter of 1954-55. In early March, we were 3.3 inches away from knocking that record out of the park. Might be wondering how this compares with an average Anchorage winter. Historically, Anchorage gets about 69 inches of snow. So this year, we're just about double that. As I've talked to a lot of folks, they're saying, look, we've made it this far through the winter. Just give us that additional 3 inches so that we can claim record-breaking history. And I understand that the average in April, if it's true to history, we might be able to break that. I don't know if that's going to make people happy or not, but it could be one for the history books. Anchorage is not alone. Many other communities are experiencing record snowpacks that are 1.5 to 2 times normal. I was in Homer yesterday. They're at 193.3 inches, 16.1 feet of snow. Looked pretty good down there yesterday, I will report. But that's about 7.2 inches from the record that was set in the 79-80 winter. One man there in Homer made the comment that we've broken records and we've also broken a lot of shovels and our backs aren't doing so well either. So people are carrying the burden. So really the question is will the heavy snowpack increase the risk of catastrophic flooding? What can we in our communities do to mitigate that risk? And if the worst happens, how will we respond? So to answer these questions, I'm joined by 3 of Alaska's best and brightest. We have Dr. Scott Lindsay. He joined the National Weather Service after earning his doctorate in civil engineering from Utah State University. In '94, he moved to the state of Alaska. Today, he's a service coordination hydrologist for the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. Next to Dr. Lindsay is Michael O'Hare. He is the Deputy Director of the Alaska Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And then we have Robert Forget, best known to folks here in Anchorage as a broadcast meteorologist for Channel 2, as part of his day job, Alaska Area Manager for the FEMA, for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So I'm going to ask each of these gentlemen to open up with a short presentation. I will have a series of questions, and if we have time, we would encourage questions also from the audience. We've got some media here that I know also have some questions. I had solicited some inquiries via Facebook earlier in the week, so hopefully we'll have an opportunity to ask some of these questions that we received from others to 3 of you. So with that, why don't we just start here to my left. Dr. Lindsay, if you want to begin the conversation.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. We have a lot of questions about breakup this time of year, and it's our job to make sure those questions get answered and that people have the information they need to make good decisions. Just briefly, what our office does. National Weather Service has a mission to provide data and forecasts to people for the protection of life and property. We provide Alaskans and visitors to Alaska the information that they need to plan and prepare for situations that can potentially be dangerous. And my office specifically, the River Forecast Center, works with the forecast offices in Alaska and also Hawaii to provide hydrologic guidance, and we try to monitor and predict flooding and also any other uses of our rivers. There's a lot of transportation, recreation, power generation. There's a lot of other uses of the waterways of Alaska, and so that's our responsibility. I wanted to just talk a little bit about past events. There have been 22 federal disaster declarations in Alaska since 1990, which is an average of one a year. 14 of those have involved flooding in some way. And some notable events in the last 6 years. 2006, we had rainfall twice, both August and October, that caused severe flooding in Matanuska-Borough and Copper River Basin. 3 years ago, in Eagle and all along the Yukon, we had incredible breakup flooding. Eagle, Stevens Village, and Tanana were the worst affected, but there were many areas around the state that were affected by breakup floods that year. And then just last year, community of Crooked Creek on the Kuskokwim was devastated by an ice jam that formed downstream. So what's our current situation? That's the big question on everyone's mind. Snowpack on March 1st was much higher than normal, especially for South Central. And I think we need to remember, those of us who live in Anchorage and Homer and Cordova and Valdez, we have seen record-breaking snow. The interior snowpack is closer to normal. Varied in March from 100 to 130% above normal. We have just gotten April 1st data that's still filtering in. The snowpack in South Central and Southeast continues to run 130 to 170% of normal. Most of the central interior is about 100 to 130% normal still. And in Canada, the headwaters of the Yukon are between 110 to 150% of normal, with some records in the Yukon territories. And that affects us as the water gets into the U.S. Ice thickness is another variable that we track. At the beginning of March, it was near normal, and it is still near normal. The interior has seen some really cold temperatures, and one might have thought that the ice thicknesses would be greater than they are, but because we've had a pretty consistent deep snowpack, the ice growth hasn't proceeded like we would normally expect for some of the temperatures that Fairbanks and some interior areas have seen. March was colder than normal over nearly the entire state. Anchorage was about 5 degrees average temperature below normal. Nome, Kotzebue, some of the northwest areas were 10 degrees below normal. But this winter has been very much a seesaw. November was cold, December was warm. January was cold, February was warm. March was cold, and now the question is, what's April going to be? However, with the long-term climate outlooks calling for March to be cooler than normal for parts of the state, for April, that does increase the likelihood that we can see a sudden rise in temperature late April, early May, and that is the primary trigger for bad breakup floods. Just to show you some of the current temperatures, this is the Bethel area year to date, and you can see that yo-yo effect of the cold, warm, cold, warm. But one of the things to look at is the freezing line. And as we've seen in Anchorage, you get 30s and 40s in the daytime, below freezing at night. And that freeze-thaw cycle really attenuates the snow melt and helps us. It drags it out over a longer period of time. So that's really a good pattern. This is what happened last year in the Bethel area, just as an idea of what might have led to the flooding in Crooked Creek. You can see that there's a mouse here. Right here, the temperatures, the low temperatures are all of a sudden above freezing almost all the time. And we have this area up here, which is all above normals, normal highs. And when we see this kind of pattern where a lot of temperatures, not very much freezing at night, and you have the temperatures that are higher than normal highs, that's the pattern that we look for that can cause problems. This was the Fairbanks area. This is current. And again, you can see hardly anything with temperatures above normals or above freezing. This was Fairbanks in 2009 when the Yukon flooded badly. And you can see right here, the last week of April, all of a sudden your temperatures are above freezing, and then you had records being set that last week of April. And then, again, a large area above the high normals for the year. So this is what we look for. Now, just to highlight those two areas. Our current situation. This was March 1st snowpack. We get this information from the National Resource Conservation Service and their cooperators that go out and take measurements of snow at the first of each month. And that's vital for us to be able to know what's going to happen. And we also get information from Yukon Territory and what their snowpack is. And you can see that all this area, southeast and south central, is greater than 150% of normal, with a large area that's 130% and higher. The only area really that was well below normal is the North Slope. We just did get for Alaska the April 1st data. And again, if green is about average, you can see that 80% of the state is average or above to well above normal for snowpack. We look at the climate predictions. We don't have the ability, although our weather models have improved dramatically over the years, we don't have the ability to forecast using numerical weather models out 14 days or 21 days. And so what we do is we use climate signals to determine that. And you can see that for Alaska, for April, this is what the climate signals point towards. And this is particularly concerning because Kuskokwim has a large snowpack, and we're looking at cooler than normal temperatures for the month of April. And that, again, increases the probability of these rapid warm-ups. So what do we expect this year? Potential for severe flooding exists. The ingredients are there. If we continue to have cool temperatures throughout April, each day that occurs, we will have a greater chance of having severe flooding. Currently, we've rated flood potential at 1 level above normal. Now, what that means is if a village or a community has minor flooding every year, that's normal for them. And so they could expect maybe moderate flooding this year. And villages that normally don't flood might see flooding this year. The idea of normal in the bush means what do they see in most years? And there are villages that flood every year. We have a map. This is last year's what happened. And you can see it was really a pretty mild year. No flooding over most of the state. This is Crooked Creek and Red Devil. You have some flooding at on the Clayoquot, at Kobuk and Buckland. But generally speaking, last year, with the exception of Crooked Creek, was a very mild year for breakup. This is what we're showing right now for our flood potential. The lighter green is 1 notch above the low to medium potential for flooding. The yellow dots are places that normally flood, minor flooding, but those villages are at a higher risk for moderate flooding at this point. And you can see those scattered around the state, and it really doesn't tie directly to the river. It's more, was this village built in a place where it's all right next to the river in all areas, or was it on a hill? And that's what determines whether some of these places are flooding. How do we monitor breakup? We get information from the villages, and that's vital for us. But someone who is standing on the bank of the river can only see so much. They can see what's going on right in front of them. So one of the things that's vital for us in this process is to program that's called River Watch. This has been going on for over 30 years. We do this in conjunction with the state of Alaska, with Mike and his folks. A hydrologist from the River Forecast Center teams up with a person from the state. We fly in a small plane and we follow the breakup front. We land in the communities, we talk to folks there. If ice jams, we go upstream, talk to them, tell them what the jam is, let them know how solid it looks, let them know what the potential for severe flooding is, and if we need to, we want to make sure they're ready for it. And I'm sure that Mike will discuss this more about being ready, but we also talk to our forecast offices, which have the responsibility to disseminate this information. Now, I will say that for most of the villages and communities along the rivers, we get the word out by word of mouth. You know, they're not going to get a message on the teletype or something to let them know that it's flooding. They can look out the window and see that. But it is important to coordinate relief efforts and to get people prepared for helping when floods occur. So when severe floods do occur, the state and FEMA coordinate the management of the state, federal, and tribal efforts that bring relief to the communities involved. So this was Eagle in 2009. Through really devastating flooding. The water came up about 40 feet. You just can't imagine what that's like unless you've been there and you've seen it. Stevens Village and Tanana were also devastated. Crooked Creek in 2011. It pays to be prepared, and that's our message for this roundtable. Is it's a lot better to prepare and maybe not have things as severe as you thought than it is to not prepare and be ready. We have a Facebook page. We'd encourage those in the villages. If you snap a picture, if you see something happening, please let us know. And that's it for my part. I guess I'll just pass it on to Mike and do questions at the end.
Yes, that's great. Dr. Lindsay, thank you. That's very informative. Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah.
Technically challenged, Senator. Okay, Senator, thanks a lot, Scott, for that great brief.
Do you have your mic touched there?
There we go. Thanks. Senator, thanks for having this roundtable. We appreciate being here. It's a great partnership. I'm going to give an overview of what the state of Alaska does, the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management does, an overview specifically to River Watch, what our spring looks like, and what resources we have for the small communities to be prepared for any disaster. Springtime floods specifically. Our mission primarily is the saving lives and protecting properties, all Alaskans from any disaster. We'll focus on spring breakup and focus on River Watch program. As Dr. Lindsay said, the River Watch program is a partnership with the Weather Service and our division. We fly the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers low and slow. We evaluate We evaluate the ice conditions, river conditions, and we alert and warn the communities as to the potential threats. Who are the major participants? And I have 40 slides. I'm going to whip through this thing pretty quick, so Andrea, focus me on this. So we've got our division, the Pacific River Forecast Center, Scott and his crew, and also our river neighbors. The goals for that, of course, monitor the river conditions, prepare communities in advance for flooding, get boots on the ground as necessary, and then advise community leaders on basic emergency management immediately following significant flooding. Scott went through some of the history, so I'll whip through this. Since 1978, flooding has caused ice jams. They've garnered federal and state declarations over 50 times. This happens every year. This is our spring. Declared disasters since 1978 is accounting for about a third of all declarations in Alaska, ice jams and fall sea storms. We all know the communities involved, the riverine communities. On the Yukon, Kuskokwim, this just gives a map of those communities affected by river flooding, sea storms, and/or both, as you can see. Another picture, Alaska communities included in disaster declarations for floods. The reason why I can go so quickly, I've got a lot of pictures on here, so big fan of pictures. So as we discussed how often ice jams and flooding occur, pretty much every year. This happens on a regular occurrence. We went through the history real quick. State and federal disaster declarations. I just want to just give a rundown of the process. The local communities take care of their citizens. Okay, they're responsible to have emergency operations plans in place to take care of their citizenry. If their citizens are overwhelmed, they go to the community for help. If the community is overwhelmed, they would either turn to the borough, if they're part of an organized borough. If they're not, they turn to the state of Alaska for help. They call Brian Fisher, who's there in the audience. He's the chief of operations. They call for assistance at the Emergency Operations Center, and the state will assess the situation, provide immediate response help to life safety, critical issues, and then discuss further response, and then eventually the recovery from the disaster. And then from there, the state requires further assistance and contact our brethren with the federal emergency management folks. And we're really glad to have them here in Alaska. The area office is critical to us and critical to our operations. So as you can see, this happens quite a bit. Some pictures. One, Clayoquot and Mulatto floods. 2002, ice jams. That's what an ice jam looks like. We'll either see ice jams like that, which caused flooding in Aniak. Salsha floods in 2003. Mnemonic in the lower Yukon and Kwethluk in 2005. 2006 spring floods, Kwethluk again and Mnemonic. And then we have this disastrous, destructive, abrasive ice. I think somebody termed it ballistic ice, or catchy term. But what it is when the ice jam floods, you get these house-sized chunks of ice backing up and then pulverizing, lifting homes off their foundations and or pulverizing the communities, as we see in Eagle and Eagle Village. It's quite an impressive feat. And then 2010, the Buckland floods. And then 2011, spring floods with Crooked Creek. This is our time frame for spring. I'll just give you an overview. In March, we prepare and coordinate with National Weather Service, discuss initial forecasts, what we're looking at, and talk about preparedness planning for breakup in our River Watch mission. Early to mid-April, DHS and EM, we send out information to the communities. We put out a flood watch message, video out on TV. We also mail it out to the communities. We also mail out breakup guidance to the community leaders in these riverine communities and coastal communities to remind them of the significance of this spring flood. We also provide the Alaska Emergency Response Guide for small communities. And I gave you a copy of that center. It's on our webpage, ready.alaska.gov. So we send these out to the leadership of the community. It's a great resource, not just for flooding, but for every event. Our focus is to work through all hazards. But we send this out in the springtime, early springtime, and it goes through quick guidance, quick guidelines, quick suggestions and thoughts for preparedness, what to do in response, 12, 24 hours, start of the event, and then 72 hours, who to call, when to call, what the situation is. So, and we do it in such a way that it's a quick read, quick checklist. It's a great tool to have. So you can get it on our website if there aren't any more copies over there. And then late April and May, our State Emergency Operations Center activates to support the field mission of Riverwatch. And then field work begins on ice deterioration, as the ice deterioration begins. But if there's any flooded communities that are there, those folks that are in those airplanes, my operations people, along with Scott's people, are there on the ground to assist the leadership to provide some technical expertise for emergency management, response, and recovery. So it's a great partnership, and that runs depending upon, so that's our March, April, and May. And we see how June goes based on the extent of April and May. Like I said, the spring breakup guide, and we turned into actually the all hazards emergency response guide for small communities, which is a great tool. Information sources, Scott was talking about, those field sources, as well as the remote sources, the sensing and weather products that we get. We rely on the Weather Service to provide us that science so that we can alert and warn the communities to be prepared for what comes. Field observers, as you can see, watching the ice, but you can only see that part of the river that you're looking at. You don't know what's either down below you or above you. Scott went through the weather projections. We all know it's above average. I encourage you to get linked up with this website. It's a great visual of what we're looking at, how breakup is progressing. I'll leave that one alone. We also, webcams all over the state at the airports are critical to us. Get a quick visual on what's going on. What happens during the program, we take, like I say, fly low and slow. We take a lot of pictures, get the hydrologists get a real understanding of how this ice is going to break up, and then what rivers are flown. Always the Yukon and Cuscos. Sometimes the Clayoquot, depending upon the forecast and what we're hearing from the communities. And then, if necessary, Tanana, Kobuk, and Buckland, and their tributaries as necessary, based on the flood threat. Normal breakup season, normal. And we've experienced some abnormal lately, but it usually goes east to west. Just remember that, it goes east to west. And runs through all of May, maybe a little bit into June. Field teams we talked about consist of our emergency management operations specialist, a hydrologist, and a pilot. And then down below, our Emergency Operations Center standing by to support the field teams and to jump into high gear if there's an event that's happening in the community. We use topo maps to relate what we're seeing, where we're seeing with the local leadership so they can prepare their communities. Get down into the communities, talk about what we see, and then provide alert and warning through Marine Band radio. And then also, if we're in the community, we'll get on the radio stations and broadcast from there. If significant flooding occurs, the Riverwatch team, like I said, remains in place. They stay in place. There are boots on the ground, there are ears and eyes, and there are also the guides for the local leadership to best operate under emergency management conditions, and just to guide them along. This is a chaotic situation sometimes, as we've experienced, so it's good to have one of our crew there to help them out. And then eventually what we'll do, third bullet down, we'll deploy an incident management team to assume liaison and incident management with the leadership in those communities. It's a great relationship with, like I say, not just with the Weather Service, with the local communities flying the rivers. They know we're coming. They know my staff, our staff, and we've got a great relationship. So what happens and what it looks like, I actually had some video going on, but due to technical difficulties, it didn't work. We're talking about, like I say, ballistic ice, huge chunks traveling 8 miles an hour, can do just about anything it wants. Or we experience high water flooding, as we see in Amonic, Clayoquot, Tuluxic. Shannon Salsha, Circle. And then we run, we want to make sure in the communities that they have their evacuation plans in place, that their shelters are in place. It all lines up with the small community guides. We also provide twice a year a spring and fall preparedness conference where we invite the local community leaders in, the emergency managers in to discuss concerns, work their preparedness plans or operations plans, and discuss any other concerns they have. So right about this time, the communities are working their sheltering plans, their evacuation plans. If the call comes that people need to be evacuated outside of the community, we work for the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. My boss is General Tom Kakis. He's also the Adjutant General for the Alaska National Guard. And we have our operations centers are right next to each other downstairs in the basement of the Armory. It's a quick phone call to get the Rescue Coordination Center up and operational to evacuate if necessary. It hasn't happened often, but it has happened, and we're prepared to respond. And that is my pitch. And I'll be glad to answer some questions. I'll pass it down to Robert.
Mike, thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Robert, thank you.
Senator, thank you. We're going to talk a little bit about the FEMA Emergency Management Agency, which I'm a part of. Alaska is part of Region 10, which includes Alaska, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. Our mission statement is pretty simple. It's to support our citizens and our first responders to ensure that our nation works together to build, sustain, and improve our capability. And we do that because we prepare for, protect against, respond to, recover from, and mitigate all hazards. Those 5 mission areas are the things that we focus on. One thing unique to Region 10 is in 2007 we opened up the Alaska Area Office. Excuse me. We've been open, and it gives us a permanent presence here in Alaska. We have a great relationship with both our federal partners, our state partners, our DoD partners, and the communities through the state. A lot of people think that when there's a disaster, it's FEMA that's out the door first, and that is not the case. It's the citizens of that community that are out first. It's really the responsibility of the community and each individual citizen to be prepared. And then again, as Mike had mentioned, if they feel like they need assistance, they go to the state. A lot of times we hear FEMA's out in the community, but actually it's the state emergency management agency that's out there, the state the Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. We come out when the state needs our assistance to support communities, and we do that through a process. And that process looks like this. When a disaster occurs, all of a sudden you'll see that, as should, that the local governments will go ahead and respond using their emergency management plans. The state government will respond if they're needed, if the community needs that assistance. If the state feels they need the help of the federal government, they will ask for a federal declaration. Actually, the governor does that to the president. Prior to that, we, the state, and FEMA go out and do a joint preliminary damage assessment to see what the damage is, to assess it, and to make recommendations. If there is a request from the governor, it goes to the regional administrator. Our offices are located in Bothell, the main office for Region 10. Recommendation is made to the president, and when the declaration occurs, the federal declaration, you'll see a lot of individuals that will come up and provide support, with the federal coordinating officer being the designated federal agent to work directly with the state. Assets are deployed. Joint field office is established, and our office is located in the Federal Building Annex, and we have expanded our space so that we can handle a joint field office without actually having to go out and look for additional space, unless it's a big event like Eagle. And in that case, we had a big building out near the airport with 4 floors of individuals assisting in that effort. FEMA responds with teams, supplies, facilities, advice, and of course with the purse strings to provide the financial aid to bring that community back on its feet. And then of course, most of what you see on the news is all about the recovery, whether it's tornadoes down in the lower 48 that we just had recently, or up here with the flooding, the biggest effort is in that recovery and trying to get the community back to where it can sustain itself. And up here, time is critical. You're only looking at 30, 60, 90 days if something happens early in the spring or late in the spring to get those houses rebuilt and get that community ready for winter. You'll look here and see the different types of assistance that FEMA gives: public assistance, individual assistance, hazard mitigation, grant program assistance. Just want to point out one thing. A lot of time when we think public assistance, we think of public assistance from the standpoint of helping someone who is financially unable to help themselves. But in this case, public assistance deals with infrastructure. Individual assistance deals with homes. A lot of people think public assistance, they think of the other public assistance. And of course, we work through the state to make sure that this money is allocated appropriately. I want to mention a couple things. Right now we have a JFO in the Alaska area office for two events: the big West Coast storms that hit us in November. The areas affected, you can see, are highlighted in the boxes. And then the second disaster was the Kenai Peninsula Borough, where we had some public assistance. All this was public assistance, mainly infrastructure. The first disaster, 4050, shows you that was caused by the storms and the flooding that resulted from those storms. The incident period was in November, presidential declaration in December, and all of this has been public assistance only. The areas impacted, you can see on the screen, the REAs and the North Slope Borough. 4050 damage assessment was $2 million. Federal shares $1.53 million. Usually it's a 75-25 split. If the state asks us, they realize that instead of having a whole cost, the federal government will take 75% of that, and they'll take the other 25, and it certainly helps the state in that capacity when they're that big. In 4054, which is down in the Kenai, again, it's public assistance only. Mostly had to do with electrical, down lines, power poles, things like that. And the damage assessment 1.83. There's the split for each of us, and we plan on completing the site visits and the JFO operations next week. But we will be working out of our region. One thing that Administrator Fugate, the head of FEMA, has really emphasized is being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar. Instead of having 30 people in my office from all over the country, when the disaster gets to the point where we can manage it from the offices back in the region, we do that. Saves tremendous amount of money to finish that joint field office. So, and I think with that, it was a quick presentation because most of it's been covered by my other two colleagues. So, with that, Senator.
Well, thank you, all of you. Again, very important information, not only from what we might anticipate, but what the resources are that are available from the state and from the federal side. I'd like to go to a series of questions that I have, and as I mentioned, we solicited from some folks on Facebook, and then if we have some time, ask those of you in the audience here in terms of the questions that you might have. But one of the focus that we've been looking at here this morning is primarily on those rural areas, those communities that are on our river systems where we see the ice jams, the flooding there that is perhaps, as you said, Dr. Lindsay, more normal. They get flooding. But as I'm talking to folks in the urban centers now, there is a level of concern that the potholes that we see may grow into lakes, and do we have systems that are able to accommodate? So when people think of spring breakup, they think of the flooding and they think of the villages on the river. The question that I've been asked by a lot of people is, what will this amount of snowmelt, the snowpack that we have here in town, how will this impact our cities? And let's use Anchorage as an example, or even as examples down in Kenai. Kodiak has record snow accumulation this year. Do you anticipate that we will see anything within the cities that should be of consequence?
We don't anticipate at this point having the kind of devastating flooding that we can see in the interior. The coastal areas do not warm up into the 70s and 80s like the interior does. We don't get the melt rates from the snowpack that typically we do get in the interior. We see a lot of this freeze-thaw cycle in the spring, and the snow is able to melt slow enough that we will see typical breakup problems. We're going to have potholes, we're going to have drainage issues, we're going to have some people, if they have crawl space problems normally, they're going to have crawl space problems. But the other thing that happened with the amount of snow that we have is that the frost depth in the ground was greatly reduced. Normally we would see 50 to 60 inches of frost in the soil. We had some reports of less than 20. And so a lot of that soil is starting to thaw out already. And that's ideal for us because as we get these freeze-thaw cycles, the water's able to infiltrate and go away. And unless the weather pattern changes dramatically, I don't expect to have severe flood issues in Anchorage.
I think that's helpful. Kim Phillips Griffin asked via Facebook whether federal funds could be used to offset the cost to municipalities and cities to clear more of the huge piles of snow that could end up in the basements and the crawl spaces. But it sounds like you don't think we're going to have that problem, and if we do, it's normal. And just from the federal perspective, it's going to be tough to try to find those federal dollars out there to help with snow removal.
I'd say people who have big piles of snow around your home, dig a trench away from your home. Give the water a place to escape so that it can go someplace other than into the ground right next to the foundation. But if you normally have water in your crawl space, make sure your sump pump's working because there will be water. The groundwater levels will be very high.
Mike, did you want to add something to that?
Thanks, Senator. I just want to add, we've experienced a situation in Cordova this winter and the issues that they've had with the amount of snow and snow removal. And there was a state declared disaster. We activated the National Guard to get some snow removal help. These folks, and it wasn't just one big dump, it was a seasonal dump, constant dumping throughout the season, which exhausted the community, and they couldn't keep up with it. So the state resources were certainly there to provide some relief for them, to give them a leg up and beat the snowfall. So there's some state resources out there we did exercise this winter.
A lot of discussion about the ice jams and the really horrific flooding that we see from that. Ballistic ice is probably a good way to describe it. Mr. Roland Riley has asked, what if there is flooding in Alaska because of an ice jam? Why can't the Alaska National Guard blow up the ice jam to prevent it from flooding more?
Don't worry, gentlemen, I'll take this one.
These are questions that people want to know.
Absolutely, Senator, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the question. And it has been done in the past, and science has proven that it doesn't work. What happens is you have an ice jam build up of large chunks of ice. I don't recall how long ago, but it was a long time ago, 50s, 60s, that was done, that bomb detonations were performed on the ice, jams by DOD, and what happens is you blow up the ice, it moves right back in. So it does absolutely no good, and the science proves that it doesn't. What we have to do is be better prepared for the floods and the damage and destruction that it does. There's nothing you can do about the ballistic ice coming back up, but you can get to safe ground, take care of your family, take care of your most valuable possessions, and get out of the way until it's done. But bombing does not work, Senator.
There are probably some out there that would still like to move forward with a couple stick of dynamite, but Bill, we will suggest that they not do that.
Thank you.
Most of the questions that I have received relate to how to best prepare, and I think the PowerPoints that the three of you have gone through outline some of the notification, how we communicate, the river watch, and I think that is all important. I think that the websites that are out there will be key. But a couple questions have come from individuals about the need for an evacuation that happens so suddenly. Irene Dragonfly asked the question, are they prepared for evacuations in a minute? I remember Tanana had to evacuate in just hours. Do they have a plan in place for evacuations? Who's the carrier? What numbers does the village call? How quick is the turnaround plan for villages in distress? I think her point is a good one, that oftentimes this just comes on very powerfully, very quick, oftentimes when residents are asleep. How do you handle that?
Yes, ma'am. The individuals, basic rule of thumb, the individuals are responsible for themselves, their families, we talked about. The communities are responsible for having these operation plans in place, and they do. They have community shelters with the schools. Around this time, they're being prepared to be open. Know that if you are alerted to evacuate, that your area along the river is potentially going to flood. We do warn those communities within a 12-hour, 8-hour time frame. We're looking at some potential flooding. Go to high ground. Go to your shelter. But make sure that you have the appropriate clothing to sustain you for 3 days, 4 days, however long it was going to take. Make sure that your neighbors are taken care of. Those special needs folks in your communities are taken care of. It is the individual's responsibility in the communities to make sure that their evacuation plans, their personal evacuation plans are in place, their personal preparedness plans are in place. And like I said, we do have the guidelines by which they can do it. Really easy templates and guidelines to put together a quick go kit, a survival kit, a 7-day survival kit, a family plan, and like I say, a community preparedness plan. So know where you need to go. Encourage your leaders to have these community meetings to discuss these issues prior to the event happening. But will I say that the evacuation plans are in place in these communities? I say absolutely yes, Senator. With regards to who to call, don't call the airline, because typically we're not evacuating out to another community. Our priority is to shelter in place in those communities. It's the safest way to go. But if you need to call for assistance, 1-800-478-2337 is the State Emergency Operations Center. And please call early, call often, because we want to know what's going on out there.
Mike, would you give the website that individuals and communities can go to for a copy of the Alaska Emergency Response Guide?
Absolutely, Senator. It's www.ready.alaska, spelled out, .gov. And it will provide you all of those great tools.
I have just 2 more questions, and then I'd like to open it up to others. And I recognize with Mike and Robert the process that has been laid out, the state working with the feds to ensure that those resources can be made available and hopefully on a pretty expedited basis. From your perspectives, is there anything that you can think of that we can do on the federal level to make the recovery from any possible disaster easier? Are our systems good, or can they be improved?
Senator, we work very, very well in recovering communities from spring floods and breakup. As we've seen that with Eagle and Crooked Creek, our partnership with the Federal Emergency Management Association, our creative utilization of the resources available to us, not only with the other state agencies, the federal agencies, but also those the volunteer agencies, the Samaritan's Purse, have allowed us to work together as a cohesive unit to be able to get people back into homes by wintertime. It's been happy to say that we've had a great track record with Eagle and Crooked Creek, and our main mission is to get people back in their homes, into warm homes, better homes, good homes by winter's end. So to answer your question, we can always get better, but I think the communications and the relationship and the collaboration is there, and it is better than I've ever experienced it.
It's good to hear.
And Senator, if I could just add, one advantage we have here is as soon as we know of something that might be a potential disaster event, the Alaska Area Office goes side by side in the Emergency Operations Center to do two things. Number one, to provide any technical assistance that may be coming up, but also to alert our DOD and Fed partners of the situation. Also, we are in direct contact with our regional staff who can send up an emergency management assistance team and do all those necessary things and expedite the process so that if we do come to the point where there is a disaster, we're locked and loaded. And it's such a great relationship that the feds and the state have. We are partners. He has my personal number, I have his. We talk to each other every day, as well as the rest of the staff. Roberta, as well as Brian and the Ops Center. We all have each other's numbers. And we do have a great communication base, and we do lean forward as the federal government to ensure we're ready to go.
My last question. What's your date for the Nenana Ice Class? Because I haven't filled out my tickets yet. I'm trying to figure out how I put two boys through college. And, every year we bet on the Nenana Ice Class. But I listened very carefully to what you said, Dr. Lindsay, about even though we had some pretty serious cold up there, that the ice isn't that big. So I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I am thinking about it, I will tell you.
Well, I will say this. I have never bought an Ice Classic ticket.
I was going to ask you if you guys had ever bought. All right, too much information there. So that question is off the table. I do notice that we have some first responders with us here in the room today. We've got representatives from the Lieutenant Governor's office and some others that I think are interested in the subject as we try to prepare. And I think we recognize that we can't always second guess Mother Nature and what she may or may not do, but this is an important effort to try to understand what might be coming and how we can be best prepared. So with that, I'd throw it out to anybody in the audience. If you have any questions that you would like to pose to the panel, we've got just a couple of minutes here, but happy to do that. I'd also like to recognize we've got a representative from Senator Begich's office with here as well. Steve.
All across the country, there's been unusual weather, and nowhere more so than Alaska. We have an acceleration of emergencies and disasters. There's no other way of putting it. And the minute the purse strings was mentioned, you went into shivers. It doesn't seem that this is a real friendly climate in Washington right now for what is likely to be increased demand for emergency services money.
Well, I would agree with you that at a time of declining budgets, I worry about the funding, the federal funding that is available for our disasters. I sit on the Appropriations Committee, and we recognize that the way that we fund the disaster funding in this country has been more than a little bit problematic because we're always wrong with our estimates. We've seen some pretty considerable disasters in the lower 48 with the storms, the tornadoes, the hurricanes, the flooding, the incredible flooding in the past several years. Alaska's disasters. I actually presented to the Appropriations Committee last year. I was worried that with the extent of the disaster that we faced at Crooked Creek, that ours was so minimal in terms of overall cost to what was being experienced in the lower 48 because of flooding all the way from North Dakota on south, that we might not be able to access those federal funds. It is a legitimate concern, it's a legitimate question, but I think we recognize that the federal role to provide for assistance at the time of these disasters is something that whether you're a Republican or a Democrat from the South or from the East, the recognition is that we've got to figure out a way to fund it. It's not easy, but we always seem to be able to come through with it. Not without a lot of hand-wringing, though. John?
You mentioned one of the panelists was bombing it then tried to before there was a question about it. I suspect 50, 60 years ago, the amount of study on the river systems probably wasn't nearly as great as it is now. And there was, a guy in an airplane said, well, let's bomb it here and check it out, see how it works. You would think that there would be a hell of a lot more competence available, a lot more technical data, a lot more river data that might in fact give that a better chance of success to bring a flood downriver or down from a village.
The technology is certainly better as far as bombs go, first and foremost. But we also have environmental concerns on the rivers as well that we have to attend to and account for. And the destructive nature and toxicity of the elements of those explosives could have an impact on our rivers, which could affect other issues down the road that we don't even want to get involved in.
So would you let that stop you from making that study anyway, or checking it out? It would seem, they're out testing, doing geophysical work in the oceans, doing geophysical work on the land, with explosive other things that may be of benefit and value to reduce the flooding in these villages. It would just seem logical that it's something that's been overlooked for quite a while.
I think if the ice jam were isolated to 100-foot square, then a bomb might have an effect. But typically what happens is the ice stops running, and then further chunks come downriver, they accrete to the bottom of that jam, like taking the plug out of the bathtub. If it were, there might be some value to that, but that's typically not the way these jams form or give out. So having looked at a lot of ice jams over the last 18 years, I don't see where that would work real well.
In the back.
Thanks for saying that.
We've heard a lot about preparing for flooding, responding to flooding. So my question was, is there any projects earmarked or plans in place for flood prevention?
In the disaster process, there is a part of that funding for mitigation, whether it be to have better culverts for drainage or better shoreline rock work, those types of things. So there is mitigation opportunities out there. I don't think we do enough of it, but we're working on trying to develop some good collaborative ideas on putting some mitigation efforts into this. I don't know if I answered that question.
Yes, what do you do if you're in touch with the city of Anchorage and what their plans for the potholes?
I will not speak for the city of Anchorage. What I can tell you, I live in Eagle River. I've got to commend the mayor and Public Works for doing a great job on getting the drains taken care of and the snow melt taken. I had 12-foot berms in my neighborhood just a couple of weeks ago, and it's processing nicely. As far as the potholes go, I guess they're waiting for the season to work on their potholes. It's pothole season.
Yes, in the back.
First of all, I want to thank you for having this discussion. Also having, in the Bethel region, having involved in a couple of disasters, that major fire lost many homes, and last year in Cougar Creek made me appreciate state federal agencies that are involved in addressing disasters and how much work that involves. I guess one of the things that I observed in those two disasters was the amount of donations that are pouring in, which is very great, but also at the same time, I think we need to let agencies know, the regional nonprofits, maybe the regional corporations who get involved in collecting all these donations of food, of clothing, that there's got to be a way of but it creates problems where, storage, transporting it, human resources where they're receiving it at the hub centers, human resources, storage at the village level that he creates problems. I don't want to say that, don't donate during disasters, it's important, but also we need to let people know that we have Red Cross, we have Salvation Army that gets involved, and that these work through that to get donations channeled through that, so we don't have a backlog of. I don't think it's got to be really out of hand.
And
It's a good point.
it's a good point.
And one other thing, I'll share. State Trooper shares that one of your presentations had a picture of a moose on the ice.
Yep.
Can I harvest that?
Oh, that's my counterparts in the wildlife.
Sir, on the other, Hooper Bay was a great example of the need to organize our volunteers, and we've done that since. Debbie Reed does a great job at the state with the volunteer organizations active in disasters. We've seen incredible organization now with events since then that allow the community to recover while we bring in the right resources, and I say we, the state and the feds. We've found that since Hooper Bay, things have dramatically improved on the organizational needs of the community without trying to inundate them with way too many shoes that don't fit or raincoats they don't need. So there's been a lot of improvements since.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the questions, and gentlemen, thank you. I think that this has been very informative. We've got